Hey, I'm Bill Meeks, and I'm talking to Brett Rounsaville, the author of a new comic book, The Provider. He funded it through Kickstarter, and I thought the Bleeding Cool audience might be interested to know, one, about the comic, because it's pretty darn good, and two, about his Kickstarter experience. How you doing, Brett?
Great. How are you, Bill?
I am excellent. Now let's talk about The Provider. For the uninitiated, can you give us the elevator pitch? Basically, what's it about?
Yeah, so The Provider is about this guy who has superpowers, but instead of trying to be a hero or a villain, he tries to cash in on it by starting his own insurance company. So he sells these insurance policies to like the 1%, and in return, as part of the policy, they get a watch that they can use to basically signal Luke Ryan, the provider, whenever the S hits the F, and he'll swoop in and save the day.
You talk about the watch. That has to be a reference to the Signal watch, right? The Jimmy
Oh,
Olsen
that's
Signal
a
watch.
tale as old as time, right? So
Yes.
many comic book tropes.
Are there any other little Easter eggs like that in there for comic book fans?
I will say that although Luke Ryan's powers aren't fully explored in the first issue, they are Superman-esque, one might say.
Yeah, yeah. He's definitely like that archetypal,
Right.
the world's best hero. Well, not
Well,
exactly
the
from a
world's best
moral.
hero, if the world's best hero happened to be a capitalistic douchebag.
I was going to talk about that. It's very much like a superhero by way of capitalism. It actually reminds me of, a lot of the 90s superhero shows, they would always have an episode where someone got superpowers and tried to cash in, and then the hero would have to try and turn them around on it. Are there any other heroes in this universe that might try and step in and try and make him think a little differently, a little more heroically?
Well, he does have a foil in the form of the Vitruvian, which is like the perfect man in this world, and he is the hero of this world. But since this is Luke's story, he is not always painted as favorably as you might think.
Now, the artist you have working on this, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Bruno Oliveira.
Oliveira, yeah.
Oliveira. How did you hook up with him? Has he done anything before, or I really
He's
like
done
the artwork.
Oh, he's brilliant. He's done a couple of other little projects before. I think he did a couple of pages for DC, and he's studied with Pixar. But I swear to you, if he does not hit it big because of The Provider, he will hit it big because of whatever he does next. The guy is right on the edge of being one of the coolest artists you've ever heard of. And I found him on Digital Webbing, which is this awesome source for creators on the web that you may or may not know about. But it and Pencil Jack are both basically these forums where writers and artists can both meet up. I posted the synopsis for The Provider probably a year and a half ago now, maybe 2 years ago now, and lots of people sent in their stuff, sent me their portfolios, and said whether or not they wanted to work on it. And Bruno, far and away, had the best portfolio and was just so easy to work with. He's the best guy in the world.
Yeah, like I said, it's really strong artwork. It has just a. And this might sound like an insult, but it's not. It's just a little muddy. It's gritty. Yeah, without being like 90s like in your face like gritty, but everyone has like I don't know 80-inch biceps and
He also colored the book, and well, you describe it as muddy, but that quality is one of my favorite parts about it because he's such a gifted artist, but he is so uniquely Bruno. He's clearly not trying to be an Art Adams or a Todd McFarlane or a Rob Liefeld or whoever. There are so many people from our generation that are built to mock one of those artists, and Bruno is Bruno, and he's great at being Bruno.
Oh yeah, and like I said, muddy was not an insult at all. I love it, and it works for the book.
Yeah.
I think even from a subject matter sense, because it's kind of about this guy who's a little morally gray. So I mean having that kind of impact in the artwork is kind of fitting. Okay, question for you. If you had a superhero on the payroll, what would you have him do?
Unfortunately, I would probably react very similarly to how one of the major bad guys of the first arc reacts, in that he starts bringing Luke Ryan, the provider's entire world to a crashing halt by just jumping off of buildings at random and forcing Luke to save him. which results in this insurance fraud case that starts bringing his company down. And sadly, that's probably drawn from my own psyche. I'm sure that's exactly what I would do, is just show off to friends.
Actually, I thought that was going to be your answer, and you didn't disappoint me.
Glad I could help.
I was looking around on the website a little bit, and I've heard you talk about it before. You said you've been working on the concept for a while. Like, how long's it been gestating up there? How's it developed, and what gave you the idea to begin with?
Forever. It actually started with some conversations with one of my friends in college, which admittedly was a very long time ago now. And we were basically talking about how we would handle superpowers, like college kids do. Sitting on a cockroach-ridden couch talking about what it would be like to have superpowers. Mm-hmm. And sadly, we both came to the conclusion that we would try to find a way to make money off of it rather than being a good guy. And it grew out of that. And then eventually, probably about 4 years ago, I wrote the first draft of what's now the provider and gave it to this friend for his birthday with a bunch of art pages, hoping that he would be the artist on the comic. And as life happens, he grew up and had several kids and a very good job, and decided that he didn't necessarily need to draw a comic. So it sat in a drawer for a while until I found Bruno, and now magic has happened.
You decided to go with Kickstarter to get the all the budget and everything, get it funded, get it printed, all that. What made you decide to go with Kickstarter?
Oh man, I cannot say enough good things about Kickstarter. They take a fairly large chunk in that they take 5% of however much money you raise, and then because they use the Amazon payment system, Amazon takes a little under 5% also. But that said, I cannot think of another way where magically all of these people that love cool things will give you money so that you can make cool things for them. And that blows my mind. I can't say enough good things about Kickstarter, and clearly it is the most brilliant idea in recent history.
It worked out well for you and everything. But besides the whole, you mentioned the percentages. Are there any big downsides that you found in the process? Anything if you were sitting down with the president of Kickstarter, you'd be like, hey, you should change this?
There's not necessarily anything that I would change on Kickstarter's side, but there are definitely downsides to Kickstarter. One, you are suddenly very beholden to a very excited bunch of people who want to see what you told them you were going to make. So although there may not be a deadline involved, all of a sudden you will have hundreds of people asking you often when it's going to be done. And the other downside is when you build your reward system, it's difficult to keep in mind that you have to fulfill those rewards at some point. Not so much, it's not a problem in the ways you would think it is, rather. It's great to get people excited and get people on board just by virtue of them putting in their donations. Then all of a sudden they're on your team. They're looking out for you, and that's great. The downside is that it takes a very long time to fulfill some of these rewards. And I actually feel really bad about some of the people that were most generous to the provider Kickstarter, because almost by definition, the more generous you were, the longer you have to wait to get your rewards, because the more rewards there are, the more difficult they are to actually fulfill. So, for example, anyone that donated over $75, I believe, for the provider Kickstarter is getting a different printing of the comic book. They're getting a sketch cover version that's being printed. So not only do I have to do a different print run for them, but then that comic book has to be shipped to Brazil, where Bruno is, so that he can draw an individual sketch for them. Has to get shipped back to me, so we both have to sign it, and then I will actually finally fulfill the order by shipping it to whoever happened to give out $75. So instead of getting the comic instantaneously, like the people that just gave $5, who get it digitally, the people that are super generous and give $75 are literally getting their comic like 2.5 months later than everyone else.
I noticed that you're basically just throwing out like a CBZ and I think maybe a PDF, if I remember correctly. Yeah, with no DRM or anything. Was that a conscious decision, or was it just easier?
No, that was a very conscious decision. I'm happy to share it. The whole reason to do the Kickstarter for me was that I am not a comic book publisher or a comic book distributor. So the most important thing to me is to get the comic out there and in as many hands as possible. And if people really feel like they need to spread it like wildfire, then by all means, spread away.
Now, if you had to do the whole Kickstarter process over again, is there anything you'd do differently?
I think the things that I would do differently don't relate to Kickstarter so much as self-publishing. Self-publishing in general turns out to be a very difficult thing to do. And I'm not sure I would tackle it again in the same way. If I had to self-publish the second issue, for example, I probably wouldn't go to print. I would probably do it completely digitally.
Okay, now I know you've been, you've been getting out, hitting up some conventions, trying to promote the provider and everything. Has there been any cool experiences you've had because of that?
Any modicum of success I've had in any aspect of my life, I usually attribute to my lack of a fear of failure. I'm completely okay with looking like an idiot and failing over and over again if it means I'm going to succeed that one time. So the day after I got the comic books in my hand, the printed version held my very first ever comic book that I wrote and got printed. The day after that happened was Image Expo in Oakland, which is where I happen to live. So it was perfect. There are all these fantastic creators and this great publisher, and I could go in and hand my comic off to all these amazing people. And that was when I learned that fear of failure actually exists. Like, it turns out I'm a huge sissy when it comes to handing out my comic book to people. And what was the worst part about it was it caught me completely by surprise. I walked through the door like head held high. I'm Brett, and I'm going to show off my comic book. And then the second I walked up to a creator, I was like, excuse me, sir, would you mind maybe reading my comic book? I'm sorry about all the sweat on the cover, but okay, thank you, bye. And it was both pathetic and frustrating, and I hated myself for the entire rest of the day. And then I went home that night, and I called one of my best friends, and I was like, Nate, I just found out I'm a huge sissy. I sat at home alone and moped that entire evening about being a sissy and not being able to show off my comic book to people. So then the next day when I went back to Image Expo, I knew that I was a big sissy, and it turns out there was a lot of power in that. Like, knowing that I was going to freeze every time I talked to someone at least meant that I knew what to expect. So I was able to walk up to some people that I was very excited to meet on that day and hand out my comics. And the very last person that I handed a comic to was Brian K. Vaughan, easily one of my all-time favorite writers, and probably the only writer that, like, consistently over the last 10 years has turned out nothing but awesome. So I handed the comic to him. And I was like, excuse me, Mr. Vaughn, would you mind reading my comic book, please? And he was like, wow, this actually looks like a real comic book. This looks really good. Congratulations on actually making this happen. And I was like, oh, thanks very much. I really appreciate that. Would you sign this for me? And then I totally freaked out and lost my not outwardly, of course. Kept my cool on the outward side, but inside I was like, oh my God, Brian K. Vaughan just asked me for my autograph. This is amazing. And that guy could have totally turned around, ripped the comic in half, and thrown it in the nearest trash can, and I would still have nothing but respect for him just for being that cool of a guy when someone who clearly is not in the same league as him walks up to his table and begs him like a 8-year-old to read his comic book.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier the possibility of an issue 2. I mean, the issue 1 ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. When could we possibly expect to see issue 2?
Well, issue 2 is scripted. Issues 3 and 4, rounding out the first arc, are all plotted, and then the second arc is lightly laid out. So really the only thing holding it up is either finding a publisher or making enough money off of sales from the first issue to afford to do a second issue.
Would you consider going back to Kickstarter to get the second issue funded, or is that probably not in the realm of possibility?
That's in the realm of possibility, but I think that it definitely looks like I will make enough money off of sales of the first issue to be able to fund the second issue on my own. That's a fingers crossed scenario. And again, ideally, I would find a publisher who could actually pay to have the first issue reprinted and then subsequent issues printed. And that way, there's some actual distribution instead of me walking into comic book shops and begging people to put it on the shelves.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of indie publishers who check out Bleeding Cool. So hopefully, maybe now that you're getting the word out a little bit, that'll help out in that process. You want to go ahead and give us, the website where people can get the book and anything else you want to promote about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. LukeRyanInsurance.com is where you can buy the book. You can buy the printed version or the digital version from there, either way. You can also find it on Graphically right now, if that's your preferred option. And you can find me on Twitter at Amtrekker, AMTREKKER, if you're looking for me. And I think that's about it.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you very much, Brett, for talking to me. And, people out there, The Provider, it's a great book. I went in expecting a decent book. I came out, it's a fantastic book.
Awesome.
It stands up there with any other, indie comic on the shelves right now. It's really good. So thank you very much, Brett, and look for more coverage of all things comics, movies, television, pop culture, whatever on bleedingcool.com.